My name is Olivia. I'm 39 years old, and for the fifth year in a row, my birthday began with the same hollow sting, a text from my mother that read, "Happy birthday, honey. Sorry we're a little busy. We'll call you soon. Love you." The same words I'd gotten last year, and the year before that. By now, I could recite them by heart. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at the sunlight slanting through my kitchen window. It was supposed to feel like celebration, a morning where I'd feel remembered, loved. Instead, it was the same familiar ache, dull and heavy, pressing into me like it always had. I tried to push it away, tried to tell myself not to care. But then as the coffee brewed, Instagram served up the truth in glossy pixels, a photo of my younger sister Megan, grinning on a sunlit balcony overlooking the ocean, a brand new Gucci purse perched proudly in her lap. The caption from my mother read, "Celebrating my baby girl's birthday early. Nothing but the best for you." The location tag was Charleston, the same beach house they had rented for 3 years in a row. My birthday is in June. Megan's is in August. They weren't busy. They were on vacation, celebrating her. Again, forgetting me. My blood ran cold, but beneath that ice was a burn I'd carried my whole life. Megan was always the fragile one, the one who needed special attention, endless support, designer gifts. I was the strong one, the responsible one, the one who won scholarships, bought my own car, never asked for help. And in my family's story, there was no room to celebrate the strong one. Nathan, my fiancé, walked into the kitchen and caught me staring at my phone. He glanced at the Instagram post and then at my face. He didn't say "I'm sorry" or "that's messed up." He just looked at me with a gentleness that shattered something deep inside me and asked, "Are you tired of being the strong one?" That question broke the dam. Memories poured out of me like floodwater I had been holding back for years. I told him about my 32nd birthday, the one where I finally got a reservation at that impossible-to-book Italian place, only to get a call an hour before dinner. My parents canceled. Megan had a bad day at work and my mom rushed to her side. I told him about the time I had my wisdom teeth removed. My mom promised she'd pick me up. I sat dazed in the recovery room, mouth full of gauze, waiting an hour before finally calling an Uber. Her excuse later, she'd lost track of time. And then came the wound I still couldn't touch without breaking. The year I miscarried. The doctor said I shouldn't be alone, so I called my mom. She promised she'd come. I waited. 2 hours later, I climbed into the loneliest Uber of my life, curled up in the back seat trying not to cry. The next morning, her text arrived. "So sorry about yesterday. I just figured you'd want to be alone." Nathan listened silently, his hand gripping mine, his steady presence the only anchor in the black hole my family had carved into me. And something shifted. This time felt different. The fifth identical birthday text, the blatant lie about being busy, the beach trip, the Gucci purse, it wasn't neglect anymore. It was a choice. They were choosing to erase me. My hands shook as I picked up my phone and stared at my mother's message. For years, my replies had been cheerful, forgiving. "Thanks, no worries." But this time I typed 5 words that scared me more than anything I'd ever written. "Don't bother calling. I'm done." And I hit send. The response was instant. My mother's reply flashed across the screen. "Are you serious right now?" Not "what's wrong?" Not "I'm sorry," just outrage. How dare I have feelings? How dare I disrupt the script? Within the hour, I had 10 missed calls, an email from my father, a masterpiece of gaslighting, telling me I was selfish, dramatic, ruining their vacation. He said I was tearing the family apart. Then came Megan's voicemail, her voice dripping with tears. "I don't know what's going on, Liv, but you're putting me in the middle and it's really unfair." For the first time in my life, I didn't answer. I put my phone on silent and let their chaos spin without me. The silence was terrifying, but it was also powerful. A week later, an invitation arrived in the mail. My father's retirement party. Inside, in my mother's elegant handwriting, was a note. "Let's put this behind us and be a family again. Please come." It wasn't reconciliation. It was a guilt trip wrapped in cardstock. Part of me, conditioned by 39 years of keeping the peace, almost caved. I even drafted an apology I didn't owe, But then two things happened that changed everything. The first thing was the call from my aunt, my mother's sister. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with concern. "Olivia, honey, your mother called me. She's so worried about you," she said. But then her words shifted sharp as a blade. "She said you're not well. Not hurt, not heartbroken, not well." They weren't telling people I was struggling. They were telling people I was unstable, that I was losing my grip, that I was the problem. The punch of betrayal hit so hard I had to sit down the phone shaking in my hand. And right as the spiral began, as the panic rose in my chest, my computer pinged with a new email. I clicked it, bracing for bad news, convinced it was my boss telling me something had gone wrong. But it wasn't. It was from the CEO of my firm. His words leapt off the screen. "Olivia, congratulations on landing the Sterling account. Your extraordinary grace and integrity under pressure make you the most reliable asset on this team." For a moment, I just stared, rereading the lines over and over. Grace, integrity, reliable. Words I had begged my family to see in me for years, but which had always gone unnoticed, unspoken. And here they were from someone who actually valued me. It was like armor sliding into place over my chest. The validation I didn't know I'd been starving for. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to the retirement party. I wasn't going to play the dutiful daughter while they whispered that I was unstable. Instead, I let them call, let the guilt pour in like floodwater, and I didn't answer. A few days later, my mother demanded I come over for a serious talk. Against every instinct, I agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed resolution. Their living room was exactly as I remembered it. Stiff leather couches, family portraits on the walls, portraits where my presence was always minimal, tucked to the side. My mother sat primly, my father rigid beside her, and Megan sprawled with her phone, not even pretending to care. They were a united front of disapproval, like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment. My mother started, her voice firm, dismissive, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Olivia, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point. Now it's time to stop this nonsense." Then, as casually as if she were asking me to pass the salt, she said, "I need you to sign the quarterly transfer papers from your grandfather's trust." I blinked, stunned. That was why I was here, not to repair anything, not to talk about pain, but to sign documents, to keep the money flowing, to fuel the machine. I looked at her, then at my father, then at Megan, who was still scrolling through Instagram. And in that moment, I realized something they didn't. They had no idea. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. I laid it on the coffee table between us. The Nightingale Trust. I said, my voice calm, steady, echoing in the suddenly quiet room, was established by Grandpa before he died. He made me not you, the sole trustee. Their faces faltered, confusion flashing, then panic beginning to bloom. I went on. He said I was the only one who understood that money was a tool, not a toy. And for the last 10 years as trustee, I've authorized quarterly disbursements for the mortgage, the cars, the vacations. My eyes landed on Megan. And the purses. Megan's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes wide. My obligation was to manage the trust for the family's well-being, but it also gives me full discretionary power. I opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. "This is my official resignation as trustee, effective immediately. Management will transfer to a corporate bank, and I assure you they will not be as generous." The silence was deafening. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw hung slack. Megan's fingers tightened around her phone like it was a lifeline. For the first time in my life, they were looking at me not as the difficult daughter, not as the one who could be ignored, but as the person who had been holding up their world all along. My mother was the first to find her voice, but it cracked into a strangled whisper. "You can't do this." My father's anger followed, brittle and desperate. "Olivia, this is our money, our lifestyle." I stood, feeling lighter than I had in years. "It was Grandpa's money," I said softly, "and he entrusted it to me. I spent a decade making sure you were comfortable, but I'm done. My peace is more important." I walked to the door. Their voices called after me, breaking, collapsing, desperate, but for once, none of it touched me. I closed the door behind me and let the weight of decades fall away. I didn't sleep much that night. Freedom has a strange aftertaste when you've starved for it, sweet at first, then dizzying like your body doesn't quite trust abundance yet. I lay awake with the city humming outside my window and rehearse the moment over and over, the folder on the coffee table. My mother's face blanching, my father's jaw going slack. Megan's thumbs stalling over her screen as if the air had suddenly thickened. I expected a tidal wave of panic to hit me for blowing up the only script I'd ever been handed. It didn't. Instead, there was a steady, widening quiet inside me, like a room in my chest I'd finally cleared out and opened the window to. The wave did come from them. The first salvo arrived by noon the next day, an email with legal letterhead, the kind meant to rattle your bones. It was full of words like disruption and obligation, and none that sounded like apology. Another letter followed, and then another, misinterpretations, stacked like bricks, all intending to rebuild the cage I had just stepped out of. I read them once, slowly, let my pulse crawl up the back of my neck, and then set them down as if placing hot coals back into the fire. People will throw everything they can when you stop carrying them. The noise swelled, then began to recede like weather that tires itself out when it realizes the house is built to last. The silence that replaced it wasn't empty, it was spacious. I used it. Nathan and I started a ritual on Sunday evenings where we cooked too much pasta and talked about small things with the reverence of people learning how to live without chaos. He has a way of listening that makes the truth arrive sooner. When I told him I kept waiting for the grief to knock me down, he asked if maybe what I was feeling wasn't the absence of grief, but the presence of peace, and that sometimes our bodies confuse the two because peace feels so unfamiliar. I wrote that down on a sticky note and left it on the fridge like a lighthouse you can stick to steel. A week turned into two, and the sky of my life kept clearing in increments. I caught myself laughing in the middle of a weekday for no reason. I lingered in bookstores without checking my phone. I bought flowers that didn't need an occasion. The small, defiant tenderness of loving a life you were told didn't matter. There is a power in that. Then the envelope arrived, heavy paper, my mother's cursive looping like it always had. Inside was an invitation to my father's retirement party with a note tucked behind it. Let's put this behind us and be a family again. Please come. The words tried to wear forgiveness like a coat that didn't belong to them. I felt the old reflex rise, the one that says, be reasonable, be good, be small, and then I heard the steadier voice that has been growing in me say no. I left the envelope on the counter for a day, then two, until it simply became part of the room, a relic from a country I no longer lived in. When I didn't show, the calls multiplied. I didn't answer. The texts sharpened, then sweetened, then sharpened again. I let them pass through me like bad weather. If you've ever been the scaffolding for someone else's life, there is a particular terror in stepping away. You fear their collapse will be your fault. Here is what I learned: collapse and consequence are not the same thing. Some structures fall because they were never built on truth. Days after the party, my mother summoned me for a serious talk, and I went, because closure is sometimes a door you have to see with your own eyes before you can stop checking if it's still open. You know the rest: the tribunal in their living room, the casual request to keep the money moving, their confusion when the machine stopped at my hand, the trust, the resignation letter, the moment the air changed and I could finally feel my own edges again. I left lighter than I arrived. I left carrying only myself. 6 months have a way of measuring what's real. There were a few more lawyer letters, a few more pleas from voices that had never learned to speak in anything but extraction. Then the noise dwindled. A new rhythm took root. I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't braced for impact in weeks. I could cook breakfast without flinching at the thought of my phone. I could walk to the train and feel the city as a place I lived in instead of a set I performed on. The first time I noticed that, I cried on a park bench and let strangers walk past me with their dogs and coffees because it felt important to witness how ordinary peace looks from the outside and how miraculous it feels from the inside. The email from Megan came on a Wednesday, 3 sentences spare and tremoring. I'm sorry, Liv. I never saw it. I'm trying to now. I read it twice, then a third time. Something in my chest loosened, not a reunion, not even a plan, just the soft release of being seen, however belatedly. I archived the message. It turns out forgiveness is a room with many doors, and the one I walked through didn't require her to follow. In the months that followed, I took myself to Sedona because I had once mentioned wanting to see red rocks at sunrise, and it felt like a promise I didn't need anyone's permission to keep. I hiked alone and stood still for long stretches, learning the names of birds from a pamphlet the park ranger handed me, laughing at how earnestly I was trying to belong to the world. Back home, I bought a chair for the wedge of sunlight near my window, the exact shade of green as new leaves. It wasn't expensive, but it was beautiful in a way that made my shoulders drop every time I sat in it with a book. Nathan teased me for treating that corner like a church. Maybe it is one. Maybe the holiest place is wherever you finally hear your own voice without having to raise it. One afternoon, my CEO stopped by my office door, leaned a shoulder against the frame, and said he'd been impressed with how I handled the Sterling account. He used words like grace and integrity, and reliable not as flattery but as facts he had witnessed. I nodded and thanked him. And when he left, I let myself feel it fully how different it is to be valued by people who see you not for what you prop up, but for what you bring. I wrote those 3 words on a fresh sticky note and layered it over the first one on the fridge. Sometimes healing is nothing more glamorous than repeating the truth until it sinks in. When people ask me now what changed, I tell them the simplest thing: I chose myself, and I refuse to apologize for it. It wasn't a thunderclap. It was a series of very quiet doors closing and one window thrown wide. I am not invisible anymore. I did not need them to see me to exist. I needed me to see me. And I do. 6 months out, life felt unfamiliar in the best way. The silence I used to dread no longer pressed in on me. It opened. It stretched. It became a kind of companion. I started to notice little things I had always overlooked: the way morning light paints the walls in shades of gold, the sound of Nathan humming in the kitchen while chopping vegetables, the rhythm of my own breathing when I wasn't bracing for impact. There were nights when the old ache still tried to slip back in. I'd wonder if my mother was staring at her phone waiting for me to break the silence, or if my father was still raging at the unfairness of it all. Sometimes I even pictured Megan scrolling through her closet full of purses, replaying the day she realized the flow of gifts had ended. But those images didn't hurt the way they once did. They felt distant, like echoes from another lifetime. One evening, I sat in my green armchair by the window, the one I had chosen just for me, and thought about what forgiveness really meant. People always make it sound like reconciliation, like opening your arms and letting the pain back in. But for me, forgiveness had been something quieter. It was choosing not to carry their voices in my head anymore. It was letting the story end where it ended and not dragging it into every tomorrow. Then Megan's email arrived, short and hesitant. "I'm sorry, Liv, I never saw it. I'm trying to now." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Reading it gave me enough. For the first time in years, she'd said something honest, and that was all the closure I required. I archived the message and went back to making dinner with Nathan. Forgiveness didn't demand that we start again. It only asked me to stop bleeding from old wounds. A few weeks later, I finally took that solo trip I had dreamed of for years. Sedona. I woke before dawn, hiked out to a ridge, and watched the first rays of sun spill across red rock canyons. The air was so still, it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. I thought of every birthday text that had made me feel invisible, every broken promise that had left me small. And I thought of the woman standing there alive, steady with her own feet on solid ground. She wasn't invisible. She had never been invisible. I came home with dust on my shoes, a new journal half filled with scribbles, and a kind of peace that felt unshakable. At work, I poured that steadiness into everything I touched. My colleagues noticed. My boss noticed. But more importantly, I noticed. For the first time, I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back. Not the overlooked daughter, not the dutiful sister, just me, Olivia, enough all on her own. I still don't know what the future holds with my family. Maybe one day Megan will reach further. Maybe she won't. Maybe my parents will soften. Maybe they won't. But I've stopped waiting. I've stopped measuring my worth by their recognition. Because the truth I learned through all of this is simple. Sometimes peace comes when you stop begging to be seen and start choosing to see yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it touched something inside you, I'd love to hear your own journey. Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought you couldn't live without, just to protect your own peace? Share it with me in the comments below. And if this story gave you strength, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps me know these words matter, and it helps more people find the courage to tell their own truths.